On the surface, Elkwood Shores was the picture-perfect suburban dream. Wide sidewalks meandered between rows of tidy, pastel-colored houses. Oak and elm trees arched over the streets, forming shady canopies in the summertime. Flower beds brimmed with petunias and marigolds, while the sound of lawnmowers gently hummed on weekends. Young children dashed around on bikes, grandparents strolled with their pets, and neighbors paused to exchange pleasantries about the weather. Central to the neighborhood's sense of order was the Elkwood Shores Homeowners Association, HOA. As in many suburban enclaves, the HOA coordinated landscaping, holiday decor regulations, and occasional get-togethers to strengthen communal ties. Some residents joked that Elkwood Shores was so calm it was almost boring. Even the annual budget meetings rarely stirred drama, until Cynthia Collier, known not so affectionately as Karen, rose to prominence. Karen was in her mid-50s, with meticulously styled hair, pressed slacks, and a frosty smile that rarely reached her eyes. She had moved into Elkwood Shores a few years earlier, quickly volunteered for the HOA board, and used her position to enforce every bylaw with zeal. At first, neighbors appreciated her diligence. There were fewer unkempt yards and fewer unapproved paint colors. But soon, they realized Karen's real personality, a rigid enforcer who inserted herself into every minor dispute, demanded compliance on the smallest matters, and thrived on making others feel small. This story focuses on an event that would shake Elkwood Shores to its core, a conflict that started with something as innocent as helium balloons at a children's fundraiser. No one could predict that the culminating showdown would revolve around a massive, joyous balloon parade. Yet in Elkwood Shores, anything was possible when Karen got involved. Before the balloon incident, Karen had already developed a reputation among families. She often roamed the neighborhood with a notepad, scribbling down addresses of those who violated trivial rules, an overgrown shrub, a lawn ornament an inch too tall, or a child's inflatable pool placed too conspicuously in the front yard. She used the HOA's official stationery to send stern warning letters, demanding immediate correction. Behind the scenes, the other HOA board members, like the patient President Marjorie McLeod, the conciliatory Secretary Gabriel Ortega, and the easygoing Treasurer Danielle Fisher, tried to soften Karen's iron-fisted approach. They recognized the importance of maintaining a friendly atmosphere. Yet Karen's unstoppable dedication to upholding standards exhausted everyone. She believed that if the HOA didn't strictly enforce every bylaw, Elkwood Shores would descend into chaos. Still, some neighbors gave Karen the benefit of the doubt. She's just meticulous, they reasoned. She cares about the community. But others, especially those with children, found her meddling infuriating. Complaints about sidewalk chalk, basketball hoops in driveways, or colorful holiday lights that didn't match the approved color scheme sparked resentment. Tensions simmered below the tranquil facade, waiting for the slightest spark. That spark arrived with the Elkwood Shores Children's Fundraiser, a friendly neighborhood fair designed to raise money for a local children's hospital. Each spring, Elkwood Shores hosted a charity event to benefit the nearby St. Francis Children's Center. This was no formal gala but a lively, family-friendly fair, complete with face-painting booths, a bake sale, kids' games, and sometimes a small petting zoo. Parents volunteered their time and resources. Children excitedly prepared crafts and donated a portion of their allowance. It was a cherished annual tradition. In her role on the HOA board, Karen typically involved herself in fundraising logistics. She took pride in showing off her organizational skills. But ironically, the fair's relaxed, kid-focused atmosphere clashed with her preference for rigid order. Karen insisted that every booth have uniform signs and that the entire park area remain free from unsightly messes like confetti or sidewalk chalk drawings. She also wanted strict limitations on noise levels, despite the fact it was an outdoor children's event. The other board members tried to steer Karen toward tasks like booking the venue or coordinating sponsor forms, hoping to spare the families from her overbearing presence. Meanwhile, parents arranged for a small carnival atmosphere. They planned to fill the park with bright helium balloons, each representing a donation or a tribute to a child fighting illness. Little did they know how these balloons would become the catalyst for Karen's biggest meltdown yet, and a symbol of the community's united pushback against her tyranny. On a sunny Saturday morning, Elkwood Shores Central Park buzzed with excitement. Volunteers set up folding tables laden with baked goods, craft kits, and raffle items. Colorful balloons bobbed in clusters, tethered to signs reading, "Support St. Francis Children's Center." The cheerful squeals of kids filled the air as they chased each other across the grass. Karen arrived early, wearing a pressed blouse, neatly ironed trousers, and a badge that read, "Event Coordinator." She systematically inspected each booth, offering unsolicited critiques. "Your sign is slightly crooked," she scolded a teenage volunteer. "Could you please align these chairs? They look haphazard," she told an exhausted mother who was juggling boxes of cupcakes. Despite the tension, parents did their best to accommodate Karen's demands, partly out of respect for the HOA and partly to keep the event peaceful. Still, resentment simmered. People whispered to each other, rolling their eyes whenever Karen scurried off to find new infractions. One of the day's highlights was the Toddler Balloons Corner, managed by a few parents with very young children. They offered bright, helium-filled balloons in all shapes and colors, some decorated with smiley faces or cartoon characters. The idea was that each toddler who donated $1 or $2 could pick a balloon, giggling with delight as they carried it around. Every few minutes, an adult would tie a fresh batch of balloons to a table so kids could choose their favorite. That corner, ironically, was the place where Karen's meltdown began. Among the many toddlers who flocked to the balloon booth was a cheerful 3-year-old named Ellie Campbell. She had big brown eyes, curly hair, and a penchant for giggling at everything that sparkled or shimmered in the sunlight. Her parents, Susan and Tim Campbell, were active volunteers, handing out cookies at the bake sale. Ellie's job, as she saw it, was to carry as many bright balloons as she could hold. By midday, Ellie had collected 3 balloons, 1 pink, 1 yellow, and 1 purple. She waddled around happily, the balloons bobbing overhead. She squealed whenever a breeze tugged them, as if they were her newfound friends. Other children also toted balloons, creating a festive atmosphere of colored dancing across the park. Karen, however, watched from a distance with disapproval. She considered the balloon booth too chaotic, fearing stray balloons might float into the tree branches or the neighboring yards. Twice she had already complained that discarded balloon ribbons could become litter. The volunteer parents responded by assuring her they were cleaning up thoroughly. Things escalated when Karen noticed Ellie, who had just received a brand new balloon, a shiny red one with a sparkly unicorn design. The toddler tried to hold all 4 balloon strings in her small fists as she toddled toward the bake sale area to find her parents. The problem: Ellie's route took her across the central walkway, which Karen was pacing with her usual brisk stride. The exact details would later be debated by eyewitnesses, but the general consensus was this: Karen crossed paths with Ellie, who was focusing on her floating balloons rather than looking where she was going. As they converged, there was a tense moment where Karen made a sudden movement. Some claimed she stepped sideways into Ellie's path, while others insisted she deliberately kicked out her foot. Whatever the intent, the result was undeniable. Ellie stumbled over Karen's shoe, her little foot tripped. The toddler gasped, lost her balance, and fell onto the grass. Her precious balloons slipped from her hands, drifting upward in a swirl of bright colors. At first, Ellie was too shocked to cry. Then her face crumpled, and she burst into frightened tears. Parents nearby rushed over. Susan Campbell let out a cry of alarm, dropping a tray of cookies to scoop Ellie into her arms. "What happened?" she demanded, glaring at Karen. Karen's face hardened. "She wasn't watching where she was walking," she snapped. "Someone could have been hurt if she ran into me." Others overheard and stared at Karen in disbelief. Ellie was all of 3 years old. How could she be blamed for running into an adult? Trembling with fury, Tim Campbell knelt by his daughter, checking for scrapes. Ellie sobbed, pointing skyward at her lost balloons. They were now just colorful specks drifting away into the bright spring sky. "You," Tim began, eyes brimming with anger. But he stopped, focusing on comforting Ellie. A small crowd formed, murmuring about how Karen had stuck out her foot. One neighbor insisted she saw Karen's leg jerk forward as Ellie passed. Another claimed Karen muttered something like, "These kids need to learn manners." Karen, feeling defensive, crossed her arms. "It was an accident," she declared tersely. "But these balloons are out of control. They should have better supervision for children in a busy area." Susan shot Karen a look of outrage. She's 3. You could have just stepped aside. That's not the point. We should keep the main walkway clear, Karen insisted. The tension was palpable. A few volunteers tried to defuse the situation, but the damage was done. Ellie's pitiful cries, combined with the sight of the lost balloons floating away, sent waves of anger through the parents. Karen, previously known for petty HOA crackdowns, now looked like a bully who deliberately hurt a toddler. The entire fundraiser took on a somber note. Within an hour, the incident had spread through the fundraiser like wildfire. People whispered about how Karen tripped little Ellie and made her lose her balloons. Eyewitnesses recounted their versions, some more dramatic than others. The main takeaway was the same. An innocent child had been hurt, perhaps not severely, but enough to break her trust. Ellie, cradled in her parents' arms, calmed down once she received a replacement balloon. Volunteers rallied around her, offering stuffed animals, cookies, and hugs. But the sweet toddler remained shaken, sniffling each time she remembered her dropped balloons drifting away. Karen, meanwhile, attempted to carry on as if nothing happened. She busied herself with adjusting table placements or telling volunteers to pick up trash. But the vibe around her had changed. Neighbors shot her accusatory glares, and a few openly confronted her about the trip. "How can you treat a child like that?" demanded John Morales, a father of 2. Karen insisted it was an accident, that Ellie just collided with her. But the more she tried to defend herself, the more people's tempers flared. Eventually, Karen retreated from the park, muttering that she was tired of being attacked. She left behind a swirl of anger and confusion. The fundraiser carried on, but the once cheerful mood was marred by this ugly incident. Over plates of brownies and cups of lemonade, families vented their outrage, saying, "This time, Karen crossed a line." By the next morning, Elkwood Shore's Facebook group and neighborhood forums were ablaze with posts about Karen's balloon fiasco. Some wrote long paragraphs condemning her hostility. Others shared personal grievances, describing times when Karen's petty interference had ruined their day, like forcing them to remove a child's bike from the driveway, or complaining that a backyard swing set was too high. Susan Campbell posted a photo of Ellie holding a single new balloon, with a caption that read, "She's doing better today, but we can't forget how quickly kindness can be lost. Let's keep our neighborhood safe for our kids." The post received hundreds of comments, many expressing sympathy for Ellie and outrage at Karen's behavior. Karen, in her defense, tried to post a statement of her own. "I regret that a child tripped at the event, but the walkway was overly crowded. I do not deserve to be vilified for an unfortunate accident." This did little to quell the storm. Parents responded with fury, some calling her heartless or demanding she apologize more sincerely. The HOA board, Marjorie, Gabriel, and Danielle, realized they had a crisis on their hands. Their private chat buzzed with messages like, "We can't let the situation spin out of control," and "Karen's not just controlling, she's become a liability for us." But removing her from the board wasn't straightforward. Official rules required a vote by the membership or a resignation. With tensions skyrocketing, it seemed certain the community would push for some form of censure. Yet among the fiery online comments, one idea emerged that captured people's imagination: a neighborhood balloon parade. It began as a half-joking remark. "We should march with balloons by Karen's house to show her we stand with our kids." But the more parents discussed it, the more it felt like a brilliant, positive protest. Initially, the idea was simple. Gather at the park with a bunch of helium balloons and walk a route through the neighborhood, passing by Karen's home to make a statement about children's joy and community unity. It would be a peaceful protest, but also a spectacle, vibrant, colorful, impossible to ignore. Over the next several days, a core group of parents and residents formed an ad hoc committee to organize what they began calling the Elkwood Balloon Parade. They wanted to ensure it stayed family-friendly and nonviolent. They also discussed the possibility of turning it into a mini charity event, with any proceeds going again to St. Francis Children's Center, thereby continuing the positive spirit that the original fundraiser had momentarily lost. In an online poll, hundreds of residents expressed eagerness to participate. People volunteered to bring helium tanks, balloon bouquets, and decorative floats. Some suggested wearing bright t-shirts or painting friendly signs with slogans like "Kids First" or "Happiness Floats Above Hate." The question on everyone's lips: could the HOA ban such an event? Technically, a street parade might require city permits, but Elkwood Shores was known for casual block walks that didn't block traffic. As one neighbor put it, "We're just going for a walk with balloons." No law against that. And many recalled that Karen herself had once insisted that the HOA had no jurisdiction over peaceful assemblies. Her own words could be used against her now. As preparations ramped up, Karen learned of the plan. Rumors spread quickly in Elkwood Shores. She was livid, seeing it as a direct attack on her. She frantically reached out to her few allies, hoping to rally them in opposition. But the incident with Ellie had turned even mild supporters against her. The best Karen could do was draft an angry letter to the HOA board, calling the parade an unlawful demonstration meant to harass a homeowner. Yet the board responded politely that it was not an official HOA event, and if parents wanted to walk around the neighborhood with balloons, it was their right. With the route mapped out and the date set, the Elkwood Balloon Parade promised to be a big turnout, bigger, in fact, than any local event in years. Word about the balloon parade spread beyond Elkwood Shores. Someone posted about it on a local citywide Facebook page, describing how a meddling HOA Karen had allegedly tripped a toddler at a charity fundraiser. The story's sheer ridiculousness and heartbreak caught the public's attention. Within days, a small local news outlet picked up the piece, reaching out to Susan Campbell for a quote. She explained how the parade was intended to show unity and support for our children. Local newspapers published short articles titled "Neighborhood Unites Around Toddler," "Prepares Colorful Balloon Protest," or "Parents Push Back Against HOA Bully with Massive Balloon Walk." While some might have dismissed the story as minor gossip, the human interest aspect, the toddler's lost balloons, and the community's creative response turned it into feel-good local news. Suddenly, the parade organizers found themselves fielding messages from strangers across the region, offering to donate balloons or share supportive words. The potential size of the event ballooned, no pun intended, beyond Elkwood Shores. Meanwhile, Karen seethed with humiliation, her name increasingly associated with malicious behavior. The impending spectacle raised questions about how Karen would react. Would she hide in her house, call the police, or come out ranting? Would the HOA intervene at the last minute? Most neighbors believed that, as long as the parade didn't block traffic or create hazards, there was little Karen could do to stop it. In a last-ditch effort, Karen took several steps to try and shut down the parade. Letters to the board. She sent multiple emails claiming the parade constituted targeted harassment, urging the HOA to impose fines on any participating homeowner. The board responded that there was no bylaw to justify penalizing peaceful walking or carrying balloons. Appeal to City Hall. Karen contacted the local city council, complaining about a potentially disruptive demonstration. However, city officials concluded that as long as participants respected sidewalks, crosswalks, and didn't obstruct traffic, no special permit was needed. Scare tactics. Karen posted on Elkwood Shores Facebook group, warning that participants could face lawsuits if they marched by her house chanting slogans. She claimed it was defamation. But attorneys in the group quickly noted that carrying balloons on a public sidewalk was not defamation, and chanting "kids deserve safety" hardly constituted slander. Realizing her efforts to cancel the event were futile, Karen switched tactics. She typed up a long, self-justifying post about how this is a witch hunt and the toddler's parents are overreacting. She ended with, "I will not be intimidated in my own home." This rant only fueled more participants to join. Families viewed Karen's unyielding stance as confirmation that the parade was necessary. Some joked that they might carry placards reading, "Witch hunt," more like balloon hunt. The impetus grew stronger. Come parade day, folks from neighboring districts planned to show up too, pushing the expected number of walkers into the hundreds. On a bright Saturday morning, cars filled the streets surrounding Elkwood Shores. At the Central Park, where the ill-fated fundraiser had taken place, a lively crowd gathered. Tables set up early offered coffee, donuts, and face painting for children. Volunteers distributed free balloon strings and sign-making materials. Small clusters of participants formed, some wearing matching t-shirts with slogans like "Children Over Conflict" or "Stand Up for Ellie." Others simply came in casual clothes, arms draped with strings of helium balloons that bobbed overhead. Parents helped toddlers tie balloon ribbons around their wrists. Kids squealed, racing around excitedly, marveling at the rainbow of balloons in every direction. A modest local TV crew arrived, setting up a camera to document the event. They interviewed a few participants, who explained the backstory in calm, measured tones. "We're not here to intimidate. We just want to show that we support positive community values." Unlike the neighbor who decided it was acceptable to trip a toddler. By 10 in the morning, the crowd was enormous. Estimates ranged from 200 to 300 people. At the front of the assembly stood Susan Campbell, little Ellie perched on her hip, holding two balloons that matched her bright pink outfit. Ellie, now calmer, flashed a shy smile. Despite everything, she found the spectacle exciting. The volunteer parade marshals gave a quick speech. "We'll walk at a slow pace along Sycamore Street, turn onto Maple Avenue, and pass in front of Ms. Collier's house. Then we'll circle back to the park. Keep to the sidewalks where possible. Wave politely if you see onlookers." With that, they started walking. The Elkwood Balloon Parade began. The line of participants stretched across several blocks, each step accompanied by the gentle bobbing of countless balloons. Some families carried small signs reading, "Choose kindness," or "Kids' joy can't be tripped." Others simply walked quietly, letting the mass of color speak for itself. Neighbors emerged onto their porches to watch, many applauding or waving supportively. A few individuals, friends of Karen, remained sullen, arms folded, or peering from behind curtains. But the overall atmosphere was festive and resolute, reminiscent of a holiday parade. Children giggled, parents chatted, strollers rolled, and the TV crew jogged alongside to capture the scene. After 15 minutes of walking, the front of the parade reached Karen Street. People fell oddly silent, as if crossing an invisible boundary. Everyone knew this was the epicenter of the tension. On either side of the road, watchers craned their necks, wondering how Karen would respond. Sure enough, Karen stood at her driveway, arms crossed, brow furrowed. She looked at the approaching sea of balloons with a mixture of outrage and disbelief. The local TV camera swung in her direction. A hush fell over the crowd, punctuated only by the whisper of balloon strings rustling in the breeze. As the parade neared her house, Karen stepped forward and raised her voice. "You people need to leave me in peace. This is harassment." A few neighbors at the front of the parade paused, uncertain whether to engage. Then one brave mother called out, "We're just walking on public property, carrying balloons. That's allowed, right?" Karen scoffed, glancing at the cameras. She tried to maintain composure, but failed. "You're using your children as pawns in a ridiculous charade. And for what? A childish accident." At that, the crowd stirred. Susan Campbell, near the front with Ellie, took a step forward. "It wasn't just an accident, Miss Collier. My daughter was hurt. You've refused to apologize, and you've called this a witch hunt. But all we want is a safe, supportive community." Ellie clung to her mother's hand, gazing curiously at Karen. In that moment, some onlookers hoped Karen might show remorse or compassion. But her expression hardened further. She pointed at Ellie's balloon. "Keep those things away from my property. They can pop and litter my yard." An uneasy tension rippled through the participants. But they proceeded, remembering that the plan was to keep moving, non-confrontational, a simple pass-by. And so they did. As the mass of neighbors and families flowed past Karen's driveway, they didn't chant hateful slogans. Instead, they walked quietly or chatted among themselves, bright balloons trailing behind like miniature suns in the sky. Karen stood there, arms shaking, apparently at a loss. The entire parade filed by in a wave of color. Some children even waved or smiled timidly. The local news camera caught the entire spectacle. A group of normal families celebrating joy and unity, faced with a single woman screaming at the wind. Just when it seemed nothing more dramatic would happen, a small pivot changed everything. Near the end of the line, a group of older kids carried a hand-painted banner. "Be kind, or just move aside." One teen, seeing Karen glaring, turned to the group. "Let's hold up our banner." They paused for only a few seconds, just enough for a photographer to snap a perfect shot. Karen scowling on her driveway in the background, while the kids displayed their cheerful sign. That photo soon spread on social media. By day's end, it had hundreds of shares on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. People across the city, and eventually beyond, saw the image of an HOA Karen overshadowed by a wave of bright balloons and a slogan about kindness. Online commentary ranged from comedic relief to heartfelt reflections on how communities should treat children and each other. Within Elkwood Shores, a sense of triumph pervaded. The parade ended back at the park, where parents released some balloons skyward in a symbolic gesture of hope. Others kept them as souvenirs, giggling at how Karen's own hostility had spawned one of the most uplifting neighborhood events in memory. Karen, meanwhile, retreated indoors, pulling her curtains shut. As the parade dispersed, neighbors reported hearing her shouting angrily on the phone, perhaps calling a lawyer, the police, or her last diminishing circle of allies. But the damage, from her perspective, was done. She had become the face of pettiness, overshadowed by a jubilant demonstration of compassion. In the weeks following the balloon parade, Elkwood Shores' social fabric grew stronger in unexpected ways. Neighbors who had never spoken more than a passing greeting found themselves bonded by the shared experience. Mothers arranged playdates, fathers organized a neighborhood watch, and kids felt empowered to enjoy their childhood without constant fear of petty HOA complaints. Local news outlets continued to run segments on the balloon parade, praising Elkwood Shores for its creative stand against adult bullying. Donations to St. Francis Children's Center spiked, as the event's coverage linked to the charity's website. In a strange twist, Karen's meltdown ended up generating more publicity and funds for the Children's Hospital than any prior year's fundraiser had achieved. But what about Karen herself? Embarrassed by the widespread condemnation and negative press, she found her position on the HOA board increasingly untenable. President Marjorie McLeod gently suggested that Karen step down to avoid further fracturing the community. The rest of the board, though not gleeful, agreed that her leadership had become a liability. Karen refused at first, citing a witch hunt, but the homeowner membership soon filed a petition for a recall vote, which gained overwhelming support. Faced with inevitable removal, Karen resigned from the board, emailing a bitter statement claiming she was the victim of mob rule. Her departure brought a mixture of relief and cautious optimism. No one celebrated another person's downfall outright, but many felt that Elkwood Shores had needed this change for a long time. Without Karen's looming threats, the atmosphere in Elkwood Shores felt lighter. New policies surfaced that allowed parents a bit more freedom in how they decorated for holidays or let kids play in driveways, so long as it didn't pose a genuine hazard. The HOA board under Marjorie's leadership focused on building, rather than breaking down, community spirit. Susan Campbell and Tim Campbell watched their daughter Ellie flourish. The toddler, who had once been timid after the scuffle, regained her bubbly joy. She often walked by the park with a small balloon in hand, reminding everyone of how a negative act had been transformed into a symbol of communal kindness. Sometimes, neighbors found balloon ribbons tied gently to their mailboxes, anonymous gestures that read, "Choose kindness today." It became a subtle new tradition in Elkwood Shores, small acts that reaffirmed they were all in this together. Even the annual fundraiser turned a new page. Parents began planning a much bigger event for the following year, integrating lessons from the balloon parade. They envisioned a balloon bonanza theme, celebrating children's creativity and focusing on the positivity that had unified the neighborhood. The notion of letting color, light, and laughter overshadow bitterness became a guiding principle for Elkwood Shores as a whole. Officially, Karen, Cynthia Collier, remained a resident of Elkwood Shores. However, she isolated herself. Gone were the days of patrolling sidewalks with a notepad. After her resignation, she rarely attended HOA meetings or community gatherings. Some speculated she might sell her house and move away. Others heard rumors that she tried to file defamation suits against certain neighbors, but found no lawyer willing to take her case. Occasionally, Karen would appear, slipping out of her driveway in the early morning or late evening. Her curtains remained drawn. The yard, once meticulously trimmed, started to show signs of neglect. Ironic, considering Karen's obsession with perfection. A few neighbors felt a pang of pity for her. Still, no one had forgotten how she treated a small child and then doubled down on hostility. Over time, Karen's name became more of a cautionary tale than an immediate threat. Parents would mention her in hushed tones. "Remember how that one neighbor tried to trip a toddler? We overcame that, didn't we?" The story of the balloon parade became Elkwood Shores' legend, a testament to how an entire community can stand up for kindness when one person's cruelty goes too far. Almost a year later, the vibrant colors of spring once again adorned Elkwood shores. The fresh scents of blooming flowers wafted through open windows, and children resumed their lively presence in front yards. This season brought the memory of last year's fiasco vividly back to mind. But with that memory came pride in how the community had grown closer. Susan, Tim, and Ellie Campbell had just returned from a day trip to the zoo, balloons in tow, Ellie's favorite souvenirs. As they strolled along Sycamore Street, they passed Karen's house. The blinds were drawn, the porch vacant. Ellie glanced at it curiously, turning to her mom. In the years since the trip incident, the toddler had grown into a talkative preschooler, her words more articulate. "Mommy," Ellie asked, tugging her balloon string, "do I have to share my balloons with that lady's house? The one who took them last time?" Susan gently squeezed Ellie's hand. "No, sweetheart." She didn't understand how special they were. "But you can keep your balloons safe now. We won't let them float away again." Ellie nodded confidently. She had learned, in her small way, that not everyone in the world was kind. But communities could rally to protect each other, and children's happiness could endure. They continued down the sidewalk, balloons bouncing behind them in the breezy spring air. Every so often, a new family moved into Elkwood shores, lured by the peaceful streets and welcoming spirit. Over block parties and neighborhood barbecues, longtime residents would recount the story of the balloon parade, how a meddlesome HOA board member, Karen, tripped a toddler carrying balloons, leading outraged parents to plan a grand walk that became a county-wide phenomenon. They'd laugh about how it sounded almost too wild to be true. But in Elkwood shores, truth had proven stranger than fiction. People would remember the swirl of colors drifting past Karen's driveway, the children's innocent faces, and the remarkable unity that overshadowed one person's hostility. The parade itself became an annual tradition. Each spring, families organized a smaller but still spirited balloon walk around the neighborhood, no longer driven by anger, but by celebration of children's well-being. They'd tie donation boxes for the local children's hospital to some of the balloons, raising money in a fun, symbolic way. Residents turned out en masse, each year telling the story to newcomers. "We used to have a Karen who tried to ruin the fun. She tripped a little girl, so we marched in front of her house with balloons to show we wouldn't be bullied. It was one of the best things that ever happened here, brought us all closer together." This new tradition served as a reminder. One cruel act can spark a wave of kindness if good people band together. The humiliating meltdown Karen orchestrated turned into a defining moment for Elkwood shores, proving that empathy could rise above spite, like balloons soaring into a clear, hopeful sky. In the quiet stillness of an early summer morning, if you happen to drive through Elkwood shores, you might glimpse a stray balloon drifting on the breeze, its ribbon catching the light, free and unburdened by gravity. That balloon is more than just a scrap of latex. It's a reflection of a community that learned to stand together, to protect its children, and to celebrate unity in the face of intolerance. Whenever passers-by see those bright pops of color sailing above the rooftops, they think of Ellie, the toddler who lost her balloons and found a community's love. They think of the mothers, fathers, friends, and neighbors who marched in solidarity. And perhaps, they even think of Karen, reminded that cruelty, no matter how small or large, cannot eclipse a neighborhood determined to keep compassion afloat. The balloon parade remains a symbol of victory over pettiness, a testament that in Elkwood shores, and hopefully everywhere, where negativity tries to drag people down, hope and kindness can always rise.